Kyle Thiermann here. I'm in Cape Town.
I was the only journalist in northern Nigeria.
Not an adventure until you get lost in Tijuana.
If you get caught inside by a giant wave, you feel really alone.
I love the adventure of waking up and not knowing what will happen and that being my job.
Kyle Thiermann Show.
Gregory, it's so nice to see you, my friend.
It's been a while.
It's been too long. How was your day today? What'd you do?
Today was great. We just finished teaching a Bragg Surf Responder and Ocean Safety Summit in my hometown of San Clemente. And today is just the aftermath of cleaning up all the equipment, repackaging it, organizing life again. So long day, but feel like I'm finally back at ground zero.
2-day course in San Clemente.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm sure you had done courses in San Clemente before, no?
No, that was the first one that we've
Whoa,
done.
that must be very special for you.
Surprising when you think about it, but for that particular class, once upon a time, we had been incorporating the use of skis, personal watercraft or MRVs, and we have shifted that to a second sort of advanced course, and in doing so, it's opened up the possibility to do it in a lot more locations. Because you always needed a harbor in close proximity, getting permits was difficult. So,
Sure.
So yeah, it's opened up basically an endless list of places that we always thought would be a great location to have one of these classes, and now for the first time this year did one in my hometown.
Super fun. Did you get to see a lot of people that you grew up with and had surfed with, and now you're getting to teach some of these skills to them?
It was awesome to see. There were a handful of the old locals, in their 50s, 60s, a couple of people even touching mid 70s who had joined the class that I'd seen and grew up. They knew me as a child, so
Sure.
They were really enjoyable to have in there. And then young kids, surfers, junior lifeguards, and then people coming from all Southern California to join to it. So it was great.
That's very fun. I'm very much looking forward to doing the LA course, which is going to come up in a couple weeks here. And I'm pulling my fiance along to this. And initially she was like, why would I take a big wave course? How would you answer her question?
The biggest misconception, and the name leads a lot of people to believe this. BRAG, which is an acronym for the Big Wave Risk Assessment Group, originated in the big wave surfing world as a response to a couple of very unfortunate and potentially avoidable tragedies in the big wave surfing scene, which led a handful of us to get together to realize, we're unequipped for what we're dealing with. We don't have the medical skill sets to deal with a lot of the injuries that we're seeing, and we need to be training more to prepare and make better decisions and potentially, avoid these ever happening again. So that was the origins of the organization, and it has since evolved. That was back in 2011. And it's since evolved into kind of multi-tiered curriculums. There's still the big wave focused classes that we do. But the baseline and what we're teaching the most of is what we call the Surf Responder and Ocean Safety Summit. And this is the foundational information that every surfer, regardless of age, skill level, ability, should have in the water. How to make thoughtful decisions, understanding the lineups where you're going, what are the risks, what are the challenges, basic medical skills. It's actually astonishing that CPR isn't a course that is taught in elementary schools.
Sure.
That everybody is given that gift of, hey, if something happens, what would I do in this scenario? So we've curated a medical side that really focuses on the most common surf-related injuries, accidents that we see, how to be an asset, and what we see in the ocean. Unless you are on a lifeguarded beach, and even if you are on a lifeguarded beach, it is more often than not that there is a surfer who is actually the first responder. Hence, sort of where we came up with the surf responder, and they're in the water. When that accident occurs, they're there needing to stabilize somebody until lifeguards get on the scene, or potentially bringing them out of the water. Which anybody who's ever had the unfortunate task of doing that in an emergency situation, it's not easy, especially if you don't know the certain techniques to use, if you have a long board, short board, no swim fins at all potentially. So we've curated this 2-day class that basically covers, the entry-level information that you really can't find anywhere. I was very fortunate myself. My father was a lifeguard, and these were, the wisdom that he passed on to me as a kid, being able to attend the lifeguard medical classes and observe, and him showing me this as I was growing through my sort of surfing career. And it's very difficult to access unless you're going into a career as a lifeguard, an EMS profession. You go into other, kind of parts of the world, you can find your, wilderness medical, responder classes in the mountain communities. It's really common. You have this sort of, avalanche, level 1, 2, and 3, kind of wilderness medicine. But in our surfing community, there's an absence for it. And there was this realization that, big wave surfing, we're going to continue, doing that and training with the skis, with the boats, really focusing on that. But let's start in the beginning, where people should be learning this. And that's,
Sure.
Any beach, any single day, things can go wrong, and it happens quickly. And hoping that, the surfing community kind of picks up, the importance of having the skills to look after each other. So that's where this class is hopefully filling that void and breaking through that big wave name and realizing that this is just ocean safety knowledge and medical training.
When I was 15, so when you're 15 and a half, you get your driver's permit, right? And at that age, the coolest thing in the world is to be able to get your license, right? And when that happened, my parents got me maybe one of the greatest gifts ever to this day, which was a day-long race car driving course with Skip Barber's driving course. Some people will recognize this is like his old school Skip Barber driving class. And for a whole day, we went to Laguna Seca racetrack south of Santa Cruz, and we raced these Mazda sports cars with bald tires, and they wet the racetrack, super open, right? So you're not going to hit any walls. And the whole point of the day was how to get out of a skid, and how to respond unthinkingly to it, right? Because what happens when most people get into a skid situation is they overcorrect, and that is then what turns you into a full 360 and you lose control. The idea was, and they said this, they're like, look, why, some parents will say, why would I ever want a race car driver teaching my son or daughter how to drive? And you say, well, we know how to do it at the most extreme levels, so we know how then to ratchet it back to the most basic levels. And I see you doing that same thing here with ocean safety.
Absolutely. And what you were just speaking there to is, that unconscious competence where you don't need to think about, how to do something. It's something we actually sort of incorporate in that level which we all should be aspiring to get to, whether it's the medical skills or even, in surfing, that you don't need to stop and think about, okay, what are the steps to, doing CPR, or, how does I need to, navigate my way through that, rip current. That it's just, we've thought about it well ahead of time. We've trained, we've prepared, that if we ever encounter these situations, hopefully we don't, but if we do, it's just the second nature, we're going to snap in, and be able to handle, whatever it is. So, great sort of comparison. And, for me personally, deriving on the years, decades of, both competing and trying to perform in the highest, level, in that big wave surfing world, and a lot of very unfortunate, accidents, injuries, fatalities, pulling on a lot of that experience and bringing it down into, those are both sort of stories that set the scene for, what we're actually teaching here. And, there's a lot of that, firsthand accounts that we want people to learn from our mistakes so they don't have to make them. And in these classes, it's also very interactive that, we get a lot of people sharing, oh, this one time in the mental wise, this happened. I had no idea what to do. Like, what would you guys have done?
Sure.
And so, we're constantly learning and evolving and improving ourselves, as, we all should be doing every moment of life.
You mentioned unconscious competence. which I think is something I want to get your perspective more on this, because I'm sure you've seen it, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories of a bad situation happening and the opposite of unconscious competence being on display, where there will be a group of people and no one does anything. And it's not that they don't want to help, it's that the human brain goes blank when it hasn't been trained to do something in that situation. And this is what military training is really all about, right? It's like, when you are in an adrenaline-induced state, how can we train you to have done the act with enough repetition that takes over rather than you just freezing up?
Absolutely. And we kind of go through that sort of progression, where we see a lot of people, we call them, unconsciously incompetent. That's, the family just shows up at the beach, doesn't know anything about it, and just ignorantly, walks out and ends up, in the rip current because they had no idea, of the dangers. And moving on up to the
consciously incompetent, right, which is not a fun place to be. Yes, this is
yeah, but at least that there's hazard, danger there, so you're gonna avoid it.
Yeah, right.
You're gonna avoid it, and then almost the most dangerous part is the consciously competent, where you feel like, okay, I've done the training, I've done the class, like now I'm ready and I can go and do this. But you need to be thinking about those steps, right? So it isn't just this intuitive reaction to it. It's like I can be out here, I've done the class, the training, but then when something happens, it's like, oh, let me remember my notes. I got to think about this. So it can lead you into this, false, sort of sense of, almost being overly comfortable, overly confident. And that's when you find yourself in trouble.
Totally.
But with that training and repetition and practice, you can move past that to that point where it's just that second nature, and you remember how to do it. So we always, forward and emphasizing that all these skills that we teach, they're perishable, that if it isn't that consistent, practice with it, where, I'm teaching these classes at least once a month now, and I still catch myself, thinking about, what was that, new, protocol that, is just, come forward, using the latest sort of science. And, as life is, continuous learning process.
You mentioned that Steve, your dad, was a lifeguard in San Clemente, and then when you were 18, became a pro big wave surfer, started traveling all around the world to these places. Was there anything that he taught you early on that was in your head when you guys were going surfing big waves, doing it a bit more cowboy style, but were you at that time still thinking about safety? Was there anything that, conversations that you would have between you and Twiggy, or you and some of those guys that you were traveling a lot with, about safety before all of this really came into a more fortified program?
Yes, we were, but looking back in hindsight, we were still so reckless. People always kind of regarded me as one of the more thoughtful, calculated big wave surfers. Greg was the one who always had the medical kit.
Yeah.
Some,
you need ratchet straps. You go, Greg.
Yeah, some kind of a plan, but. And really immersing myself in this world and surrounding myself with people who are the professionals when it comes to, risk management, the, paramedic EMTs that are helping instruct this class, and, the level and, what they know and how they operate. I, am constantly learning, just surrounding myself. And that's, what we hope to do in life, surround yourself with people who are better, and just continue to improve yourself. So looking back at all of that, it was insane what we were doing. But the decisions, I feel like, were, we knew what the consequences were, and our actions in the water, for a lot of us, reflected that if you fell on a bad wave, the consequences were yours to deal with, right? So don't surf reckless. Don't just send it over on a giant wave, because, and I feel like a lot of people in big wave surfing now are utilizing these advancements in the safety technology, whether it's the flotation, the inflation, the presence of, rescue teams on their personal watercraft in the channel is this, oh, well, somebody will come help me, or I have this tool to save me. Yeah, but it shouldn't be the excuse to be surfing reckless. And that was what I feel like, how we used to approach it. You knew if you fell, okay, you might have your tow partner that was going to come and help you, but, looking at the worst case scenarios, there was still a lot that you were going to have to deal with without much assistance.
One thing that I know you teach in these courses is just a lot about understanding the environment that you're getting into and where you might go physically if you fall on a big wave. Like, can you bring me into a situation where, whether it be you and Twiggy or you and another big wave guy, we're surfing earlier? Like, what did those conversations actually sound like early on? Like, if you're gonna get trapped in the rocks here, like, bring me into that world a little bit.
So a big part of it is teaching risk management and, using sort of a structured system that allow people to really easily, break it down and kind of assess whatever the hazards may be, what level of risk that's going to present, what we might be able to, implement, whether it's, safety tools or equipment in order to mitigate that. I always remember, and sometimes battling with Twiggy when we'd show up at a new location, where it was like, okay, ski, we're going into the lineup to navigate and kind of see, where these rocks are, what the current's doing. And, if we fell, which direction we're going to be pushed, where is that little keyhole that we might, use as our escape route. And, he was always, and we complemented each other so well. I feel like I was the one just like, slow down, safety. And then he was the one who was finally like, okay, Greg, it's time to go surfing. And, would really push me out of my comfort zone. And I would be the one who would, bring him back down. It was an incredible balance that we had. And so that was always, a funny one for us when we show up. I remember the biggest day that we ever towed in out at Cortez Bank in, I think it was 2007. In between two giant storms, and we showed up and it was unruly, and we're sitting there, I was like, okay, let's watch. And, we're watching, big set comes in. It just looks so bumpy and ugly. And I was like, I don't know, man. And, just let's watch another set. And he's like, if we sit here and we keep watching all day, we will never go surf. We will find 1,000 reasons why it's dangerous. He's like, but let's trust in our equipment. Let's trust in our ability. This is what we've been training for. It's easier to look, downhill going forward than it is at, the mountain that you still have to climb. So, that was probably one of the most memorable ones. I was like, all right, you're right. And, ended up being, for me, I know, and probably him as well, one of the most significant and, outrageous adventures we'd ever, been on.
Sure. I feel like you have this switch that flips in your brain where you're one of the most well-prepared people I've ever met. Like, not even just surfing, but just humans. Like, you really love to think things through before you act on them. But then there's this other part of you that I know, and I've seen many times, where it switches, and then you're like, okay, let's fucking do this. Like, at which I want to talk to me a little bit about that switch that flips in your mind, where all of a sudden you're no longer hesitating, like, right? Because you're a very safe surfer, but you're not a hesitant surfer. And I see a lot of big wave guys who are not as experienced as you, where they're like, yeah, okay, I'm super amped. But then when the time actually goes to send it, they will kind of hesitate in that last minute. Bring me into what it's like in your mind when that switch actually flips.
The more that I teach these classes and really kind of dissect this whole world of risk management, it is when it kind of reaches this point of being an acceptable level of risk, right? And so that is, going through all that checklist, everything's prepared. But then when I'm out there and I'm looking at, single specific waves, so people sit there and, sometimes I'll wait for a couple hours before even, choosing one wave. And it's literally, everyone comes in analyzing, I don't like the look of this one. Like, oh, this one looks good, but, a little crowded, in front of me in the line that I want to take. And, so people just think, oh, he's just, so patient, or maybe he's not even interested. And then eventually, there's that one where it's like, okay, green check, green check, green check, all those mental notes of what I want to see and the type of wave that I'm looking for. And then it's the, hey, no questions asked on this one, turn around, head down, going 100%. I'm so confident. And that is just the acceptable level of risk. And there's still, a lot of unforeseen variables in that, dynamic environment, but it's when, the math sort of adds up where it's like, I know there's a high probability I'm making this, or I'm at least willing to take the chance, that I will. And, and it meets the standard of a wave that I'm going to be, proud of and remember. And, I only need one a session, and not even that, every session out there, you learn something. But as I get older, admittedly, the level of risk that I'm willing to assume is, starting to come back, down to, I call myself a, sunny, fair weather, medium, big wave surfer these days.
Okay. Yeah, you are until the wave comes. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But and are you when you? I also feel that one of your superpowers when you're out on big days is not getting distracted. Like I've seen you out there, and I see other guys where they'll start chatting and they'll start just kind of like. There is a certain level of daydreaming that can happen when you're doing a big wave session, because even if you are Kai Lenny, catching 12 waves a session, that it's lower than what most regular surfers are catching on any given day, right? Like an average amount of waves that someone might catch on a big wave is on a big day is 2, 3, maybe 4. Is that something that you're conscious of when you're out there? Like just staying completely focused on the waves around you? And what do you think that you're doing or we're doing differently than a lot of other surfers out there?
One, I don't need many waves to sort of satiate that desire anymore. When I was younger, I feel like I was, a bit more aggressive in the way that I would move and the types of waves I would chase. But as I just mentioned, it's kind of that one good wave is enough. I will remember. I want to remember it. I want it to kind of hopefully meet that standard of something new or different. Or, that one good barrel. And if I don't get it, I'm okay. But it is just kind of that constant analyzation of my surroundings. Where is that next set forming on the horizon, and basically studying. That, hey, when they start way west over in the channel, those actually shift to this part of the reef. And, if I can see them standing up, slightly over, to the northwest, that one, as I've come to notice, is going to move to the, inside corner of the reef. So picking up on the little, nuances, people think it's just this, when it's right in front of you, you'll know. But if you're studying your, environment enough and you're really paying attention to all those subtle details of the swell direction, what the wind's doing, what the tide's doing, and, how that plays, it gives you that early insight into what that next set might be, where that wave might be. So there's a lot of that. The other big part of it, out there just breathing, staying relaxed, lowering the heart rate for when, that next set's coming. So I'm at, that kind of optimum state before I'm going into that sprint paddle for that wave where, when it's small, have those sessions, laughing with your friends, no big deal. But, if you're out there on that sort of edge and, challenging yourself, this is my version of a big wave, and it might be 4 feet, it might be 10 feet, or it might be 40 foot plus, that giving myself the best chance of success. And for me, it's just focusing on my environment, focusing on my breathing techniques, and, being ready for when, all those green check marks and my, mental notes of the type of wave I want, are ticked off, that I'm, 100% committed to it.
What are your breathing techniques when you're sitting on a big day?
So, distilling it down, and this is one of the sections of the classes that we teach, mindful breathing apnea training. And it's applicable in the ocean. This is just, a 2.5 hour crash course distilled down to as simple as it can be, so you can go out there and learn it tomorrow. And that time where you're just sitting there relaxing, focusing on those deep nasal breaths, right? and just nasal breathing in general. Science has proven, incredible fast way to sort of rewire our nervous system, induce that parasympathetic nervous system response, slow the heart rate, lower the blood pressure, that sort of sense of calm, mental clarity, helps with the decision making. So that's what I'm focusing on in that downtime. And it's not, yelling across the lineup at my buddy and, the channel at the, skis and the boats. It's just,
chill and stay focused.
And then, in the class we go through, that whole what happens when your heart rate becomes elevated after holding your breath and those CO2 levels build up in your bloodstream, and going into that, kind of semi, physically and emotionally traumatic moment where the diaphragm contractions, kick in, and the different ways that, you can breathe to help lessen that or recover faster, in between waves or in between hold downs. So, that's a really fun one. And that's just kind of derived from my years, surfing big waves and learning about this kind of the hard way. I look back, and the early, techniques that were shared with me was, before you dive in under a wave, you should be hyperventilating as fast as you can before you dive, which
is not true.
No, it's absolutely not true. All the years, the different free dive instructors I've worked with, breath hold training coaches, the years of yoga, meditation, kind of compiled into a really fun 2.5 hour class that, leaves people what I feel like with is those pearls of wisdom that tomorrow you can go implement in your session. Again, if your big wave's 4 feet, 8 feet, it's the same principles that apply, all the way up to the biggest days. I'm still practicing those same techniques.
So during these Bragg courses, you're teaching apnea training?
Correct. That's one component.
Cool. Okay. When it comes to average ocean goers, what's the most common surf emergency that you find people come across?
It just varies region to region. You're seeing a lot more concussions. And I think a lot of that has to do with the research that's coming out. Something that was just kind of dismissed. I hit my head.
Yeah, the concussions were always happening.
They were always happening.
But now people are like, oh,
hindsight, looking at it, I can count for sure on one hand 5 times where I was, severely concussed, and now going back and I knew it at the time. I just didn't really know, looking back at my sort of physical reactions in the aftermath and emotional reactions in the aftermath, like 100%. Shoulder dislocations, a lot of, especially in the big wave world, very close calls, near drownings. So many things, it's, of these accidents, injuries, they're, non-fatal. And we kind of separate and give people the tools and skill sets to really be able to identify, hey, if you see this happening, like, this is an emergency that needs to be addressed ASAP. Everything else, like, we'll give you the tools to, like, how you're going to clean that wound up, how you're going to, stabilize that victim, and then, go find that higher level of care. And, focusing on those that are, immediate life-threatening, and what you need to do to keep that person alive and stable until you get from that boat in the Mentawais to a hospital, or until EMS services arrive, if it's 5 minutes later, if it's 10 minutes later. Focusing on those, and, but leaving everybody with those basic tools of, everything in between, you should feel more comfortable of how to deal with.
You've been a part of way more than most people's level of emergencies. Like, you have had to respond to many of them friends drowning, people you don't know. Like, it feels like this has been a really big theme in your life for a long time, including your accident at Cortez. How do you feel like in some ways, like, this course is allowing you to do something with all of that, like it feels like you're able to I don't even know how is it emotionally for you, I guess, to have, like, been through all of that and now be teaching the course? Do you feel like it's cathartic, or
it's incredibly rewarding for me?
Really?
people think, oh, you're so gracious to be doing this, but like I get so much out of sharing, what I've learned. It's like that, what is the point of knowing anything if you just keep it to yourself, right? It's, wisdom and knowledge is only useful in this world if you're, passing it along. So why or how have I been involved with so much? I, of course, was putting myself in more extreme situations, on a regular basis. But, when you have that sort of, heightened level of awareness, which we hope, people who come through this class, leave with, we always joke, share our paranoia, start thinking ahead about the worst case scenarios. So you're, equipped if they ever happen. You, in a lot of ways, and you talk about people, there's certain lifeguards who just always seem to be there in that moment, and it's this, almost premeditated. They can see accidents potentially happening before they do and are, better prepared, quicker to respond. Eli Olson is a perfect example. He's just from Hawaii, professional surfer and professional big wave surfer. He's been one of the first responders on, I think, 3 of the near fatalities at Pipeline over the last, handful of years. Literally in a whole lineup of 50 people, the first person.
Right. He was there with Mackay McNamara recently, right? Was he the one who responded to that?
I believe so. But, I've talked to him, I've asked him about it, and he's like, when somebody goes down, if I'm in a place to be watching them, if I'm not looking at that very next wave, he's like, I'm keeping my eyes on them, making sure that they're okay and that they're coming up. And that's just, one testament to the selfless individual that he is, but, that awareness that any moment, something can go wrong. And, how amazing would it be if in every single lineup we just had that sort of care for one another of, look out for each other. And then, more than that, he has the confidence and the skill set to then go in and, do something. And that comes from obviously, being a phenomenal surfer, but I think, both his training in and out of the water sets himself. And so, you have people like that. And I have been exposed to a lot, as you mentioned, I shared my father was a career lifeguard. So there was always that, down at the beach, family with the kids down there by the shoreline who probably don't know any better. I'm going out there surfing, but every, 30 seconds, I'm turning around, keeping an eye on them. It's just, kind of ingrained in my nature.
Sure.
And,
I remember surfing Puerto with you once, and there was a bodyboard injury. I don't know if you remember this, but you sprint paddled in. Do you remember this? I think I was okay, I think, but you were very much watching within like 10 seconds of it happening. What have been, just to kind of bring people into those situations, are there any that you've shared in Bragg that have been really intense, either fatalities or near fatalities that you've had to respond to? And like, what do those actually look like when they happen?
Yeah, I don't share it often. Sometimes it comes up, people asking who sort of know, my life history and all that. But one of my closest friends passed away, drowned surfing Puerto Escondido together. And we had been exchanging barrels all morning. It wasn't a big day by either of our standards. He was as physically fit and prepared. His name was Noel Robinson from Northern California. And it was just a random wave, took off a little bit late, fell in a weird way, and didn't come up. And this was at a time when we weren't, wearing leashes, or there was no impact, flotation suits and all that, kind of, going back, to the reckless sort of years, I guess. And the amount of time that it took to get the lineup to respond, even after a real quick response from the lifeguards, came out on the ski, and this was kind of right as they got their first ski, to let me know, hey, we didn't see him come up. And then trying to alert, the lineup to, hey, keep an eye out, help, and look. And it was just this, chaotic scene of people surfing, wiping out, boards flying everywhere. And, that was one for me where, I don't want to say it was avoidable. In hindsight, learning from that, like I've never surfed there a day without a leash, without an impact suit, and learning from that, hey, if anything ever happens, if I'm that one who falls in a weird way, and it's happened countless times, that maybe I would, float to the surface. And then I would hopefully have a lineup who's looking after me, and be able to get me out of the water and, to the beach or to safety in a quick enough period of time. So, that's one. I use my own personal near drowning experience at Cortez as an example of, I had, at the time, it was an early prototype of the, inflation suit, had the safety team there, and, it was that last tier of, it was my safety team. Everything else, kind of fell apart, ended up okay. And there's other injuries. Coco Nogales, great friend from Puerto Escondido, had a horrific accident down in Todos Santos 2 seasons ago, where he broke his hip and pelvis, and had a pretty detailed safety plan in there that kind of got bypassed because he was on a different boat with other people, and he ended up spending a few days in the hospital being untreated, what was potentially a life-threatening injury, just because he had been taken to a hospital that wasn't quite equipped to deal with that, and in knowing that in my mind, well, I had kind of given instructions that, this is the hospital he needs to go, the only one that has the ability to care for something as significant as we thought it was. So
we did a podcast about it. He told me it was just a crazy story.
But he's good.
Yeah, he's good now.
Yeah, he's charging again and surfing better than before, I think.
When it came to the Noel accident, what could have been avoided? And were you out? You were out that morning?
Had high-fived, laughing at, I was surfing the Carmelitas right. He was down at Far Bar, and we had both kind of gotten a barrel or ridden a wave, and ended up, almost paddling back out together. And it was one of those just picturesque mornings that you dream of, A-frames all up and down the beach. And, we laughed and, high-fived in the water, and I paddled back to the right. He paddled back to the left, and on his way, he picked up a kind of right that shifted, sort of like it's like a middle peak that happens in front of the lifeguard tower, and, spun around and late drop. What could have been avoided? Accidents happen when you don't expect them. Right? Big days when you're out there, you have that heightened level of awareness. You're really switched on, focused, more conscious of, your decisions. It's, those in-between days. I've seen the most horrific injuries and accidents taking place on, small days because you put your guard down. And anyways, looking back at that, it was as simple as, hey, if he had been wearing a leash, he probably would have still been attached to the tail section of his board, even though it was broken. That would have been a way that we could have, located where he was. Now everybody down there, if it
that
is,
was that was the thing, right? That made people start to wear leashes.
That's what made me start to wear a leash. Now everybody down there, it's amazing, is wearing, flotation, impact suits, what some people call them, but it's, a wetsuit with built-in flotation that, if you get knocked unconscious, you'll always be positively buoyant to float to the surface. It's not so much flotation that you can't swim underneath the wave and doesn't inhibit your ability to surf anymore. And that's a very common, piece of safety equipment. And I'm really excited to see it actually just showing up on days that aren't big. It's just being utilized as, a form of protection. It's kind of the same way that helmets in, the ski and snowboard world, you used to be looked at as a kook if you wore it.
Sure.
Enough accidents, injuries. Now, you're kind of looked at as being a bit reckless if you aren't wearing one. And I remember the first time I ever paddled out at Mavericks with extra flotation underneath my wetsuit, and a couple of the old boys were just laughing at, when you grom, you're getting soft, and
right.
It's like, no, I just
want to survive.
So anyways, in that one, it was just nothing that we could have done. I know that it was just the circumstance. Too much water moving, couldn't find him. The lineup, as we were trying to explain to people, hey, we are looking for somebody, just kind of ignored, kept surfing, didn't really understand the severity of it. Now, we've done a couple of these, trainings down there, and there's a very clear protocol. If you see the ski, lifeguard, anybody giving a signal, of an X, that means everybody's stopping. There's a dire emergency. Nobody keep playing until this is resolved.
Right.
And
That's a big
something
one.
that kind of originated, the communication over in Hawaii, and is being adopted, more places around the world.
Right. When an accident happens, stop surfing so that you don't become another liability.
Yeah, or just compromise whatever safety rescue. You might, if you are wiping out swimming in the shore break, might then be identified as the person that they're looking for. Yeah.
Do you find that having been so close to death has changed the way you make decisions in life and like live your life generally?
Yes, absolutely. There was a time in my surfing career, big wave surfing career, and I'm actually on camera saying it, that if I die surfing big waves, then that'd be a great way to go. There's a lot of worse ways to pass away from this lifetime, and I look back at that and I cringe. That accidents happen, but the choices that I was making were lending themselves to something bad potentially happening. And as we all know, the ocean, is never a safe place. Doesn't matter if it's only, 2 feet, as I've mentioned, something can go wrong, an accident can happen. But, how I was pushing myself, the frequency, without really kind of mitigating as much of the risk as I could have. And that just came from, again, learning lessons the hard way. That's where, we kind of, grow the most in life, through those most challenging moments. And then personally realizing, what does that actually mean? If I die surfing big waves, that whatever, it's a good way to go. No, that's a ridiculous way to go. Yeah, it can happen, but understanding those consequences, that level of consequence, and not going to those extreme measures to ensure that that doesn't happen, is a pretty selfish thing to do. And knowing the emotional challenges that come from having a dear friend pass, to leave my friends and family, the people I care about the most, to try and cope with that, because I was reckless in my personal pursuit. So anyways, I have obviously clearly gone back and started surfing big waves again, but the level in which I'm doing it, I'm not willing to put nearly as much on the line. And it's like I said, only when I am confident in my equipment, my safety team, the conditions, that single wave that I'm going to paddle for, and am I putting myself out there. You talk to any kind of the big wave guys who are still regularly doing it, they'd probably tell you like, I haven't seen Greg out here in a couple of years. And it's just kind of moved beyond that personal desire, but just not willing to sort of assume that same level of risk. And that came from experiencing firsthand what could potentially be the worst case scenario. And for me, it's not worth it. When I actually realized what that was, what the consequences were, what it felt like, it's like, cool. I touched that edge. I was given a second chance, and I'm gonna
I think that it's important to delineate what you just said between avoidable and unavoidable. Like, we are all going to die. And sometimes shit just happens that really is unavoidable. But when you can look back at a situation and you think, wow, like that person died and no one knew CPR, and that's the reason why. Like, that person could have easily survived, or that person nicked their femoral artery and it had someone just had a tourniquet,
or knew how to make one out of,
how to make one out of a leash or something. Like, they could have survived. And we've done a lot of traveling together, and I really credit you with a lot of my education in that realm. Like, I have a tourniquet in my car now because of you. And it's just like, you can order tourniquets for like $10 on Amazon and just have them in different parts of your life. Like, I have taken a brag course because of you. And I've run into a few situations where I've had to give CPR. And I can tell you that when you start to consider yourself a person who acts in those situations, you begin to be a person who acts in those situations. Like you just choose from an identity standpoint to be the one who acts. And that is it's a really empowering kind of suit to wear, I suppose, to just be someone who's like, you know what, I've taken this big wave course, and I mean, I can tell you that anyone who takes a Bragg course will be more likely to respond during a car accident, right? Has nothing to do with the ocean, but you just develop a level of competence that ensures that you are going to be the person that acts really quickly, whatever the emergency is.
That's what we hope to give people. And, this is an entry-level class, but it will equip you, with the skill sets needed to potentially keep somebody alive in one of those dire situations, or hopefully, avoid it altogether, through that thoughtful decision making, before going on that trip, or at least preparing for that trip to the best of your ability. And the other really amazing part of it is the community that's built out of it, and that we're kind of building globally. And that kind of reflection on our place and purpose, and what a privilege it is to be surfing and sharing this experience with our friends. It's kind of an inherently selfish sport at times. So one of the my favorite parts of it is just kind of that reflection at the end of the class. Those who choose to show up to it, to learn how to better themselves, and to how to be caretakers of other people in that lineup, if they're ever asked to do so.
Yeah, you can be selfish with waves, but don't be selfish with safety.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, when did Bragg start?
It was 2011. It was
Wow.
kind of as a reactionary measure to the passing of Simon Malowski during a big wave surfing accident up at Mavericks in Northern California. And it was created by Danilo Couto from Brazil and Cole Christensen from the North Shore of Oahu, Hawaii. They got in touch with Brian Kealana, who is sort of the godfather of ocean safety in Hawaii. His father Buffalo, really is credited, kind of that West Side lifeguard. And Brian, took the jet skis, took the kind of organization, to a whole other level. So they reached out to him, and they're like, "Hey, we need to know more. Would you be willing to help us organize, a training and help us establish a curriculum so, these big wave surfers, themselves, myself, we aren't so ignorant in our actual skill sets to deal with what we're seeing out there."
Danilo is one of the first guys to be paddling Jaws, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. He, Yuri Soledad and Marcio Ferrer from Brazil. They called them the Mad Dogs, and they were jumping off the rocks. There had been people who'd paddled Jaws, before, but they were the three who really, and it was the kind of mid-2000s, were jumping out there off the rocks on huge days, 10-6s, and going and actually paddling the left, as they were all goofy footers.
Wow.
And that was kind of, seeing that a few times. I remember looking at it like, next level.
Really?
Not quite there yet. But
you remember
the
like
real
being there
pioneers of the paddle surfing there.
So you remember, like, did you ever go to Jaws and see, and just to like give it a look before? It's amazing to me that what's now considered as the best big wave in the world wasn't paddled until the mid 2000s.
So there had been a few people who'd ventured out on smaller days, and it was those three who really started paddling it, big 40-foot plus faces. And I had been over there toe surfing before. I mean, it was notorious as, the wild, craziest toe surf wave, which it still is when it gets to that size.
And I was talking to Albee Layer once about him watching you have one of the worst toe wipeouts he thinks he's ever seen.
I'm a horrible toe surfer. It's people always say, "Oh, why don't you toe surf?"
Yeah.
I am terrible at it. And the reason being, I always thought, like, man, if I'm toe surfing, I should be using that speed and the small board to put myself in these places on these waves that like you can't get paddle surfing, right? So that's great, but the problem is, there's probably a reason why you're not allowed to go back there, under your own power. That you have those heroic moments, but when you screw up, and again, I just wasn't that good at it for some reason. Some people, as athletic as they are, they pick up a sport.
Zoolander, you can't turn left.
Yeah, pretty much. And
I'm not an omni-turner.
This was Christmas Day. Twiggy and I bailed on Christmas with the family, and we were thinking, because there was a pretty heavy, scene of local surfers. It's like, all right, Christmas morning, it's going to be uncrowded because people are going to take the first hour or two with their family. It's like, let's be out there in the dark, and we will get a couple waves. And sure enough, it was exactly that. Launched in the dark out there. I think it was Ross Clark Jones and somebody, one or two other local teams, and we. Like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is our moment. Out the back. I have no idea. I've never really surfed it that big before. And the way the wave moves, here in California, you get the big northwest swells. You let go out at the peak and you can kind of track along. You're moving down swell. Where that wave moves out of the channel, like onto itself. So if you let go kind of behind the peak thinking that you're going to catch up, it's like down the line, bending at it. You've got no chance. So we both just... blew it on our first two waves of the morning, boards up on the rocks. And I remember having one of the boards off the rocks. It kind of had a loose fin that I shimmed with some plastic and some other garbage because I didn't want to go back to the boat ramp to get our third backup board. And I was like, cool, just one good one. Let's make it count. And faded, thinking I was going to come around, big step double up as some of those have in it. And I get to the bottom, and I'm just trying to turn, and I can feel that fin.
Feel the ball coming back at you.
Cavitating, and this is standing up, and then I just hit one big bump, and I go cartwheeling, and it was like, when you look at it, it's just horrendous. Upside down. I talked about concussions earlier. That was one of them upside down, body slams, all the way into the rocks. Twiggy got me just before, and, went back to the channel, went and got our other backup board, came back, started to tow him into a couple waves, and he already had a terrible wipeout too. He's like, hey, Brew, I'm done. I'm not feeling it. Let's get you another one. You can't go out like that. And I'm sitting there at the back of the rope waiting, and then I just start, vomiting, dry heaving, vomiting, getting all dizzy. And I was like, I'm not good. We got to stop.
Oof.
And that was the one, telltale signs of a full concussion. And stupidly hopped on a flight, chased that swell back, and I think we actually went out and paddled Cortez the next day. Just that ignorance, whatever, suck it up, powered through, and
hoorah.
Yes. Anyways, really, really reckless.
What do you? I wanted to ask you about this. I feel like the Greg Twiggy, tempestuous bromance is one of the great surfing duos. You guys are so kind of opposite in your personalities in some ways, but it the yin and the yang works. And from big waves to the wave discoveries that you've made, it's kind of a beautiful relationship. What do you if you could distill it down, what do you think is Twiggy's gift?
Twiggy has an incredible passion for adventure. That's something that we both shared and really connected with. That desire to continually push himself in big waves, which we both shared. Mm-hmm. And, his talent just as a wave rider, surfing. But what people don't know is that, you put him on any board, whether it's in the mountains or, foiling, kiting, he is so talented. He can pick it up. And he's one of those who kind of just has this intuitive sense in the ocean, knows where the waves are going to be. And so our personalities, anybody who knows us, looks as how the heck did you guys ever become friends? And it was from bonding over those shared experiences where when I was doing it, really getting into it in kind of those early 2000s, there was nobody who that I knew in California that had that same level of passion. We want to surf every single big swell, and we'll drive 24 hours taking turns, to make sure that, we're there in time. And then, and so that's where, we really connected and pushed each other. And I talked about it earlier. He was always that like, extra confident, like we've got this. And I was the one like, all right, we've got it. I know that, but like, let's slow down and think things through a little bit more. So we're the best equipped before we go out there and do it. And we had an incredible run of, chasing big waves, tow surfing, paddle surfing. And he's still, there's people who are just wired different. He's
you guys are both very intense.
He's
people.
10 years older than I am.
Is he?
I'm 42, so he's 52, and he is still,
It's got sponsored by Rip Curl.
Isn't it that insane, right? In the landscape of the surf industry, and people, losing sponsors. He's 52. 52 picking now. And you look at it, in recent years, some of the biggest paddle waves at Mavericks, arguably the craziest paddle wave ever, at Peahi in the contest a few years back. So, so that's where we really bonded and thrived. And then, of course, just that desire for adventure and finding barrels and getting away from crowds, kind of led to the, adventure travel side in between the big waves.
And it seems like the brag stuff has really become like a main thing for you, even more in recent years. Like whenever I talk to you, like it feels like it's very much, it started with Danilo and there were some years of just like figuring out what is the best way to teach this, but it feels like it's having a moment now where you're really kicking it into fifth gear, like doing more summits, streamlining them. Like this isn't just a small part of your life.
No, for the last year, it's pretty much been all-consuming. Always have just been teaching because I believed in sharing what I've learned. I love the individuals who I get to teach from. As I mentioned, people who I consider my, mentors in life, and they're coming from, backgrounds as rescue boat operators, firefighter, paramedic, EMTs, doctors. So I'm constantly learning, surrounding myself, by these individuals. We have a lot of fun. Recently kind of took over as the director of the organization and really just looking at establishing this class, the Surf Responder Ocean Safety Summit, as an incredible resource for anybody. If you're a novice surfer and 2 feet is your big wave, all the way up to 40 feet, what we're teaching, this kind of entire curriculum is applicable to meet you wherever you're at, to give yourself, structured decision making, how to make, emergency action plans, the basic principles of, conscious mindful breathing, apnea training, understanding the safety equipment that's out there and available to utilize, wherever you're at. And, help bolstering that confidence. There's obviously the CPR, AED training, medical training, so bolster that confidence going out there that, okay, I've, checked those boxes. I understand the risks that I'm taking. It's acceptable. And then if something goes wrong, I have the skill sets to be able to be an asset in that, to whether look after myself or somebody else. We've recently come out with higher class, level 2, which is our ocean risk technician, which is really focusing on the big wave stuff, deeper dive into the medical training and the actual in-water skills applications of those. So kind of mock scenarios of, what are these injuries that we're seeing in these dynamic environments, how you can, attend to those, if you have the resources or if you don't, so it's kind of like the wilderness, medical side of it. And, I use that analogy as I'm trying to explain people, what is this class? It's basically, a wilderness first responder, but focused for the surfing ocean environment.
It's great. It feels like it's good for you too. Like, it just as your friend knowing you, like, I think that you so enjoy learning, right? Like you became a pro surfer, right? You won an NSSA Nationals, right? When you were like 16.
18.
Yeah. You won the 18. I remember having a conversation with you about, like, it was one of those more philosophical conversations about, like, had you not won it, how different your life may have been, right? Because you got the You won NSSA Nationals. You got a sponsorship that allowed you to start traveling the world. You then went all in on big wave surfing and used your obsessive brain to just pick it apart in a way that very few people ever had. And you did that to such a great extent that I feel like there's a point where when it comes to just big wave surfing and your own pursuit of it, it's like, okay, you did all that, right? Like you did all that. And I think for a lot of people, when you get to a really high level at something, it's hard to then move to the next thing of learning, right? The next thing, whether it be like getting a more normal job or becoming a director of an organization, like you can have an over-familiarity in your life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like if you never leave the place, you're just constantly doing the same thing again and again. And it seems like for you to be running this organization and really growing it and streamlining it, like you're able to use that brain of yours in a new capacity, which seems like an exciting challenge in this next chapter.
It is on multiple fronts, both the organizational, which is something I've always loved. The organizing, the logistics. Whether it was the surf trip or that big wave session. Asking me my friends, like it was something I really thrived at, felt like I was good at. So when it's transferred over to organizing these summits, making sure that everything's in order. I have a lot of fun doing that. But as you mentioned, every single one of these, as an instructor, I just want to be able to articulate what I know better, and I want to know more to be able to share, more. So it's forced me to, really go back and we're always students in life, or we should be, but to really focus, on that, all the things that I wish that I knew and that I could somehow, share. Well, now's the time. My attention isn't focused on that next swell. It's really fallen in love with teaching. And so as I mentioned, lucky to be surrounded by an incredible group of people, co-instructors who are willing to share what they know, and they've dedicated their lives to studying that I can then translate into more of a surfing sense. So we have a really incredible complementary group of people who teach one of these. It's not just me. We're bringing people from all backgrounds in that sort of ocean safety medical field.
And these are 2-day courses generally?
The Surf Responder and Ocean Safety Summit is a 2-day class. So it's basically 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. 2 days in a row. The first day is all classroom based. Second day, half a classroom, and then we go onto the water and actually practice the on-water skills of rescue, how to appropriately deal with somebody with a spinal injury. There's one scenario that we've incorporated recently of how to actually extract somebody if you're in kind of a remote environment. Things that we typically have, surfboard, straps, board bag, how to actually stabilize somebody and walk them 100 yards down the beach or over the dunes or the hill. So there's a lot more. So it's just practical stuff, looking at the scenarios that I've seen personally, the stories that we've heard, that boat trip in the Mentawais, what would you do if? It's like, hey, that's a great question. Like, we should incorporate that into, what we're teaching. So it's,
sure.
Very applicable. And, especially if you're out there kind of, traveling, adventuring a little bit, but even just in your, home beach, what would you do if, you were forced to help this person for the 5 minutes until, lifeguard or, EMS services arrived.
Where do you see Bragg in 5 years?
I would love to see it be the hub for ocean safety education, that is a global class being taught in each region, that people can access multiple times in a year. Right now it's a handful of us. We're doing about 12 summits. I would love to see this be offered in, LA, Orange County, San Diego a couple times. When you look at how many thousands of surfers are out there, that, you can drop in for a weekend, you can get this education. I'd love to see it being a standard that if you are operating some sort of a surf guiding, service, a surf resort, that, your guides, have at least the bare minimum here to, and it's more than the bare minimum, but like, a standard of education and qualification that, they could help one another. Because I do hear a lot of firsthand accounts of, people going, to that resort on that boat and, coming to find out, there's actually no, medical kit. Nobody's qualified.
Yeah.
And it's just we're taking you 6 hours away. And I'd just love to see people start to approach their surfing from that safety mindset. It's incredibly shocking when you think of what surf lessons entail. Most places it's here, you've got an hour and a half. Let's take your money. I'm going to go push you into a couple waves. There's the surf shop. Go get your board. I know there's a handful of them that, hey, there's 10 or 15 minutes of, education, safety, education, but having it just be one of those places where you can be directed to, if you want to do this in the safest way possible, here's an incredible educational resource. And I've actually just converted it to a nonprofit. And so my ultimate goal in 5 years is I'd love to have this set up to where it is, a free course and accessible, not just here in the U.S. Another goal for the coming year in 2026 is to be able to bring this to those countries that don't have the EMS service at their disposal. They can't call 911, and people are showing up in 5 minutes. That it is the surf communities who are also the lifeguards, and be able to offer this level and even higher levels of education and training.
Yeah, man, I see that future absolutely, and education is just such a massive part of progression within the human race, really. Like if you think about, today, but most people don't know this, today the number one cause of death among children in Indonesia is drowning. Drowning, right? And it's not even these necessarily communities on the ocean. It's rural communities by rivers, right? It's just these impoverished communities where no one learns to swim, and they have accepted this, right, as just a way of life, right? And you look back through history, right? This is like before we had polio vaccinations, people would get horribly disfigured as children, right? And then all of a sudden a new technology, a new education comes along, and it completely changes the quality of life for mass amounts of people. And when it comes to something like CPR, the Heimlich maneuver, like things that anyone can learn very quickly and can change the course of life for lots of people. So you're both someone who has the cultural cachet and the articulation ability to be able to teach this. So I appreciate you, my friend, for spending your time this way.
Well, it's been an honor that people will show up to try and learn both from me and that kind of big wave background, and been an incredible vehicle for me to, as you mentioned, just continually better myself and learn more. So
what if you weren't a big wave surfer and it was just all an AI facade that we're trying to we've just built this whole mass campaign, your name is really Frank, and then
who knows anymore?
You never know. I know we're in a simulation.
It's possible.
Gregory, my friend, I appreciate you so much. Is there anything else that you have to say here? People can go to brag.org.com.
Brag.com. We have our next class coming up in Hermosa Beach, September 20th and 21st. And then we'll be doing another one in Santa Cruz, October. I should know these dates. But there's so many that I'm getting confused. October 11th and 12th, and then we'll be in Half Moon Bay for a level 2 class the 13th and 14th. End of October, we're heading over to Portugal, and then we will be in Puerto Rico first weekend of November, and then finishing up in Hawaii mid-November. for our last summit.
Sounds like a
For the
good
year.
year. Sounds like a good year, my friend.
Busy, but
All right.
we're looking forward to it.
All right. Much love.
You too, brother.
Bye.